Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Condo Solutions. Every Monday morning from 9 to 10 o'clock, we talk about things that affect you and your condo or homeowners association, some of the issues you may have to deal with, some of the things that you may be concerned about. We're here as basically as a community service program to answer those questions and to provide you with some of that input. And we try to provide as much information as we can. We have some limitations, though, on what we can provide in that we generally don't have access to your documents. So we're going to provide you what we call a radio answer, which is the best answer we can give you without having your documents. And so, if you have a situation, though, that really is, looking like it might go to court, or you're trying to make some decision that could have some significant ramifications that you need to know, have a hard and firm answer, then at that point you really need to contact your attorney or Peter Mullengarden, our attorney here, and sit down with him and let him look at your documents. But otherwise, we do try to provide you with good information. And Peter's background and with years and years of experience in this area is, of course, the key to that. I'm a CPA. My name is Mark Breckbill. I'm a CPA, and I have some background in this area as well for about the last 25 years, and primarily in tax and audit, and I'm also a community association manager. But again, that's what we're here for. You can call in at 220-9788, 220-WSTU. We like to get your name or a name. It doesn't have to be your name. We don't need the association name. In fact, we prefer we don't have it, because many of our listeners would maybe not think, well, it's not my association, so it might not apply. And in many cases, the situation is very similar. Because the situations are similar across a number of associations, we will tend to talk a little broader sometimes, so that we can hit maybe a situation that's a little bit different than yours, but kind of in the same genre. So anyway, that's the basis of the show. We've been doing it for about 17 years now. And hopefully we've been of service to you and to the community. So we'll keep doing it if that's the case. Good morning, Peter. How are you doing?
Good. All right, Mark. How are you?
Good. Good morning. We have a caller this morning, so I'll get to it right away, and we'll get started. Sally, go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I appreciate you taking my call.
Sure.
I have a couple of things. We have a board of directors, and our president is also a paid office manager / CAM. It seems like to me that's a conflict of interest.
Say that again. Sorry.
He is the board president, and he's also paid as our office manager and our community association manager.
And he is a licensed CAM, right?
He is a licensed CAM.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a conflict, actually. So.
It just doesn't seem like he should be our board president and also a paid employee.
Well, I think that the biggest problem there, Sally, is that it is difficult. That's a difficult situation. The association does have the ability to be self-managed. They can hire somebody to manage the association, and that manager can be paid as long as they're licensed, to do that, and provide that service. It is now. You go to the board situation, and as long as that person is eligible to run, there is the ability to have for that person to be elected as a board member and sit on the board. And assuming that the board has elections, then you'd have and it's a valid election. They would be elected to the board, and then the board could vote to make that individual president. Not really a good idea. Peter said, there's an awful lot of
theoretically you can do it.
Yeah.
You jump through a bunch of hoops. I mean, it's obviously a conflicted position, although directors, the association can hire companies that directors have a financial interest in. You can't get paid compensation to do your job as a director, so this gets close to that.
Yeah.
You would have to have the non-interested directors approve this. It would then have to be actually at the next meeting disclosed to the owners. The owners would have a right to cancel this arrangement. So theoretically, it can be done. I tend to tell my clients to shy away from that. It's just too fraught with potential problems.
And Sally, what from an accounting standpoint, it also creates a lot of internal control issues. You've got a person that may have the ability to sign contracts as a property manager, or approve contracts or arrange contracts, I should say. Maybe they don't have the ability to prove it, but they have the ability to arrange them. And then at the same time, you have the president who has the ability maybe to approve those or may sign on the checking account, which is a real problem. Now you've given somebody access to records and access to cash. And so from an internal control standpoint, and I want to make a point on that. That's not just that internal controls aren't to prevent legal issues, a theft. They are, but that's not the primary reason for them. Part of it, part of the primary reason is to allow a checks and balance so that there's an additional set of eyes that are basically looking at a transaction so that mistakes aren't made. And that's what you're going to have. And then in that situation, and I've said this before, that president is just asking for trouble. They think they're doing good and they think they're helping out. Sometimes it's a power issue. But I tell you, when stuff goes wrong and you're that person, everybody's going to blame you, including the police and everybody else who comes after. That is not a good position to be in a situation that you're the manager, you're the president, and controlling the funds. That's just, if you make any mistake, even if it's a legitimate mistake, you're going to be looked on as if it was something more than that, and there's nobody to back your story because there's nobody else out there involved in the transaction, just you. So they can't say, well, yeah, but this happened. Well, no, you prove that, and it gets to be a very, very difficult situation. I think it's I try to encourage board members to avoid those kind of things just because it doesn't end well. And as I've also said before, it's one thing if I'm the president or vice president of a corporation and something happens and the job goes sour and I'm forced to resign. Well, I'll never see that company again. It was bad business relationship, bad relationship. I'm done. I move on. What do you do when you live there? You got to go home and see everybody every day. It forces you to move. And that's the other thing is that, people have to realize that this is not only the corporation and it's your home. And are you willing to have to move because you made a mistake? And, I think if people really think about it, many of them are egotistical enough. They think they're not going to make a mistake, but it happens. And when it does happen at 80 years of age, you're moving yourself out of your home that you've been in for the last 20 years and moving someplace else. And that's not pleasant. So anyway, so that's my soapbox speech, but I do think, Sally, that, it is possible. Unfortunately, I tell you what, the variation of that is that the association hires a property management company, and then the property management company hires the board member to work on another property and pays them to work on another property, and or from time to time pays them to work on their property. And there's limitations there on what you can do on that too, especially if the property management company is an independent property management company. So, yeah, it happens all the time. It's not a good thing.
Okay, he's been at this a while, 10, 12 years, and
right.
Very comfortable in it, and it is a kind of a power thing. One other question I have is the agenda. and he feels that he controls that agenda and he is the only one, he will approve it. And if you submit something he doesn't like, he's not going to allow it to be on the agenda.
Well, at some time the board has to do something about this too. Okay. I mean, every association, the agenda is always an interesting question. I know I've talked about this a lot on the air, where the law doesn't specify. And the law does specify lots of things about board meetings and what's a board meeting and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't really address agenda. It's kind of a chicken egg thing. How do you get to the agenda that's actually on a board meeting without having a board meeting?
Yeah,
right.
right. Or without calling the board members, and asking them how you do it.
Right. So I think but some associations, the president does set the agenda. He or she does. Others, it's done in other ways where, all the board members submit their proposals or their requests to be on the agenda, and they do it that way. But at the end of the day, and I know I've said this many, many times, but the president is just another board member. When I say just, he or she doesn't have this power to make, basically dictate how everything is done. And if the other board members, now they could acquiesce in him or her creating the agenda, and if they do, they do. But otherwise, they don't like the fact that the president is, whoever he or she is dominating and making decisions that are overriding what the other directors feels in the best interest of the corporation, of the association. Then they can change presidents. If they, so I guess what I'm saying is, if the other board members allow this, it'll go on. As far as creating the agenda, if they don't, it won't. So at the end of the day, it really comes up to the other board members, going along with it or not going along with it, because they can do something about it.
Now, if let's say a board member wants to put an item on an agenda, or let's say a unit owner wants an item to
or other board members can actually call a board meeting too. You have to look at that angle of it too. I mean, they can always bypass the president sometimes.
Yeah, well, that's. But what about the situation? Let's say I'm a unit owner, not a board member, and I would like the board to address an item.
Well,
is there a way for me to petition?
Then you have to do it by petition.
Okay, so
20% of the owners petitioning, and if they petition, then the board has to address that item or put it on the agenda for the next board meeting, or within 60 days, whichever sooner.
And now, if I'm a board member, all I really need to do is get a couple more board members.
Well, look at your bylaws. Most bylaws say that. I mean, how do you call board meetings? Okay,
right.
Because again, this is not in the statute either. So most bylaws will say that board meetings can be called by the president. They don't always say that, or by a certain percentage or number of directors. So whether it's whatever percentage or number that may be, and in that case, those board members can get together and call a board meeting, notice it, put whatever they want on the agenda, and circumvent if the president is roadblocking them or blocking them and not allowing them to put things on the agenda.
Now, what if I have 5 board members? Say we got 5 board members, and I get another couple board members to again, there's a question of meeting, but let's say I get a couple more board members, and I say to them, "Hey, I'd like to have this put on the agenda. Would you support that?" And they sign a little written thing saying they want this. They want this on the agenda. Can the board members, by some manner, petition or otherwise, since they would normally have the right to, can they force an agenda item?
Again, most bylaws don't talk about that. They don't talk about agenda period in terms of how it's created. I've never seen it addressed. In that case, what they would do, which I guess is accomplishing the same thing, is they can make their request and the person doesn't go along with it, and they would just call their own board meeting. Again, assuming the document said X amount of directors can call a board meeting. So just call it and put whatever you want on the agenda, right?
Right.
Because you're calling the meeting. But again, rarely do you see anything, again, it's not in the law, that says X, Y, and Z about the agenda, except, like as you mentioned before, by a petition of 20% of the owners, the board must put that item on the agenda, whatever the owners have asked for.
Okay.
But rarely do you see anything where a board member can individually force their item onto the agenda.
Yeah, this is a situation, Sally, where the documents really make a difference, because everybody, corporate governance is all a little different from place to place. It's just that's probably one of the areas where there's a little more latitude in how you write your bylaws and things like that. So, each attorney or they have their own preferences as to, how they feel like some of that should be addressed, and so. That's where the documents really will change an answer, because
Okay. I'll check them again. I know I've Googled everything to find who sets the agenda, and there's just nothing out there. So,
like I said, because there really isn't.
Yeah.
Right.
It's kind of
our documents don't say much either. So,
and I'm sure they don't. Again, because agenda, for whatever reason, and I know I repeat myself, and I apologize. It's just one of those areas that is not expressly addressed, except what I mentioned about owners having a right to petition. But as far as how does the board itself create their agenda, it's really almost a case by case how every association comes up with their own process, their own procedure. But I was thinking, but at the end of the day, for another overused phrase, at the end of the day, if the board as a whole, or at least as a majority, doesn't like the way that things are being done, let's say by the president or whatever, they can do something about it. Okay? They can. It's just if they're willing to. Most bylaws, and 99.9% of them, say that the officers serve at the pleasure or displeasure of the board. Change presidents. Or call their own meeting. So there are avenues to get to where you want to go. It's just whether or not the board is willing to do it.
It brings me to another question. I know the law just changed that they can only be on the board for 8 years, or 4
8
terms.
consecutive years.
8 consecutive or 4. So ours have been on substantially longer than that, and I know they're looking for loopholes. And every year we decide how many are going to be on for the next year. Currently, we're dealing with 15, and I think the law states that if you don't have enough people running, and even though you've come to that 8-year limit, you can't be on again. That's because
correct.
There's space.
And even that 8-year limit, there was a discussion, and I was like, controversy is probably too strong a word, but there was a lot of discussion as to whether that 8-year limit was retroactive or prospective. In other words, was it 8 consecutive years after the law changed 2 years ago to establish that limit, or did it count the years you served prior? Most practitioners, most attorneys who practice in this area believe that it's prospective. In other words, that it's 8 consecutive years after the law changed, which means those prior 8 years didn't count. But you are correct. It doesn't mean you're automatic. Even if it did apply, let's assume that the prior years did apply. You're correct in saying that 8 consecutive years is an automatic disqualification. Okay. The 8 consecutive years, there's 2 exceptions. One is if 2/3 of those voting voted for you. Okay, not 2/3 of the whole place, 2/3 of those who were voting in that election, or as you mentioned, there aren't enough people to fill the vacancies.
Right.
Yeah, I always like that, because that makes for an interesting process. If you think about it, you have this huge election, somebody who's wanting to sit for their 9th year, and so they're past the 8 years. They put their name on the ballot, which they have a right to do, and now you get all the way down to the end of this thing. And first of all, by putting their name on the ballot, it might have forced somebody else out, so that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's an equal number of positions, and you don't really have to vote. So that happens sometimes. And then second of all, this person, it comes up and they get voted, and they don't get the 2/3 vote. And, at that point, what does it do to the election? Who's
You have to go to the next highest vote getter.
Well, yeah, but there's there's some issues in there because of the way that could have been, that could happen. That person could have got a lot of votes. They just they just may not have gotten the 2/3. So now, kind of, do they stop? Do they because they got a lot of votes? Is it the next person behind them who may have already been elected to the board because they got the second highest number of votes? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You kind of cascade down, and then and it's sometimes it's at those lower levels where you have ties, where you actually have.
Well, when I say the next highest, I mean if you're electing, 4 people, so it's the top 4 vote getters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's assume that this 8-year thing does apply. Big assumption. And they didn't get the 2/3, then it'll be you throw that one out, I guess, and it'll be the other top 4, whoever that is.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I know. It's just kind of weird because some bylaws have language in it about votes, and who gets a certain number. If somebody gets a certain number of votes, there's staggered terms. So sometimes, the position might be for a staggered term position. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, if you end up in it.
Yeah,
I mean, if that creates a tie, then that creates a tie. Then there's a whole tiebreaker procedure that you have to go through.
Yeah.
Which would be a runoff election. But so anyway, but long story short, at least how I interpret it right now is I interpret the 8 years as applying prospectively, not retroactively. So that's the first thing I look at, and then we go from there.
Did the division come out with something recently on that?
Well, they've verbally. I mean,
they've gone back and forth, right?
Yeah, they've gone back and forth. They came out with one declaratory statement that said that it basically, without much analysis, that it was retroactive, and they sort of verbally pulled back from that. So it's still not as clear as anybody would like.
Yeah. So, but I one of the things I do want to mention, Sally, is because you kind of brought it up, and unless somebody's got a really weird set of documents, which we had somebody on the other, I think a couple weeks ago, that had kind of an unusual set of documents, I thought. But for most associations, as we've said before, officers, board members serve from year to year. Officers serve from board meeting to board meeting, which means that typically, if you're unhappy with somebody as in their actions as president or vice president or secretary or whatever, that board can call at their board meeting, they can elect a new set of officers. And a lot of people don't realize that. And all of a sudden what happens is somebody gets in and they get a little power hungry. And even the people that supported them are now starting to back away and say, hey, wait a minute, this is a little over the top. But they think they can't do anything because he's the president or she's the president. And you just have a board meeting. You say, we're going to elect officers at this board meeting. And
right, they stay on the board. They just change the office position.
Yeah, they're just not president anymore. And
but you would have to have the majority of the board to do that.
Yes,
right.
Yeah, and you've got a big board.
So you have to have a board that's willing to do that. If the board isn't willing to do that, then that's not really a remedy,
right,
unfortunately.
That's kind of where we're at with that. But
okay, I figured as much.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you guys with the answers here and helping me with this today. So again, I'm just glad you're here with the radio show every Monday.
Yeah, no problem. We appreciate it.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Thanks, Sally.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, it's kind of a tough, that's a tough spot. And the thing is, it actually, sometimes you would think that.
This is just a problem that's over and over and over again. And,
right.
The bottom line is usually in these situations, not always, but usually the other board members, acquiesce with what's going on. Usually because either they support the president or nobody else wants to do it.
Yeah, that's right.
And this person wants to do it, so they'll take the good with the bad. In other words, they'll take the flaws with the with the good stuff. So this turns into a political issue more
Right.
often than not. From the owner's perspective, if they are completely disenchanted or upset, their real remedy would be the recall. But that's not easy. It takes a majority of the voting interest of the entire association. So, although it is a feasible way to do it, or I should say it's a possible way to do it. It's not always feasible because you just can't get that kind of participation or organization to make that change.
Well, and the other thing that is really kind of difficult about that is that when you have the thing that's really difficult is when you have that large of a board, and when you get that big board like that, it's very hard to do anything, and that kind of compounds. So you get a large board, so it's hard to get a majority. You get a president who's very active. So it seems like if you want to be president, you're going to have to do the same thing that president is doing. And that means, being there every day and being down at the office and checking all this and checking all that, which many times, the person's going beyond what they really need to do. Or you could have management that can do it for you. Paid management probably do a better job, but anyway, so we have another caller. Connie, go ahead. Thanks for calling.
I think Sally neglected to tell you that he's also president of the Property Owners Association. We are 3 sections under one umbrella. So he's not only the manager, the president of our association, he's also a member of the the president of the Property Owners Association. He's got this thing really clinched tight.
Well, now that gives me some more options, because based on now what you're telling me, what we need to do is get him married to a U.S. actress who will then get him to abdicate his throne position. And
you're really going back in time here, Mark.
Well, I mean, you
lost the entire audience who's not 60 something or older or under. I mean.
Is there
no. This association.
I wasn't even around for that. Come on.
It is so fraudulent. The voting every year is supposed to be done in a certain way where there's a committee, and no, we have no committee. This year, for the first time, we had a committee to count the votes. They were supposed to get there at 3:00, and they did. And at 12:00, he opened the ballot box and destroyed, and all the people that were on it from the year before were still on it.
Well, I will. It's interesting, Connie, because, well, first of all, how we say we never need to know the association. The ironic thing about this is we're talking about what appears to be a specific association. I'll bet you there's like 4 associations sitting out there saying this is my association, and it's not.
Absolutely. Well, Florida is the hub of associations.
Yeah.
I mean, there's more condos and homeowners associations in Florida than anywhere else in the world, I think.
Yeah.
But this one, and you're right. There might be 4, there might be 40 that are the same as.
They got the same issues, because this stuff happens, but it's an interesting situation. But one of the things that you just said, and it may change a little bit, because you said he's also the head of the POA, and sometimes that's a homeowners association.
Oh, and he owns a half a dozen units in 2 of the sections. I mean, this guy.
he's got some power, huh?
I mean, if anybody wanted to be king, it's him. Wow. I mean, he's not a bad guy. I mean, he tries to help everyone. He also does a lot of work,
right?
Plumbing and electrical work, and he's not licensed.
Is he licensed for that? Yeah.
No, he's not licensed, and we know it. And as people are finding out, I've been there 5 years. He's been there 15. I mean, he's been there since the inception. But
I will tell you this, Connie, and this is what I said. There are a couple of things here that demand action, and and if the association doesn't take some action, they they may they may personally be looking at lawsuits. And we've talked in the past about how board members are generally protected because they're volunteers, and under 617 there's a lot of protections for board members and things like that. But when you've got a person out there doing unauthorized electrical work and plumbing work, and they're not licensed, so they're violating the law, they're an unlicensed contractor in effect, then you open yourself up to some neglect issues. If they allowed that to happen, and what if they wire something, and we had this actually a number of years ago with an electrician that wired a pool incorrectly, and people got electrocuted, and so it's one of those things where some of these things, you need to take some action to rein that in.
Well,
And then the other thing is the election process. When you've had a violation of an election like that's as a condo, you now can you can go through and request, you can document what happened and request a new election, and request that the state monitor the election, so that doesn't
So you can
happen.
challenge. I mean, you can challenge
Right.
the election. And you have to do that within 60 days, though. It's a pretty short time frame
let me
to file a challenge.
let me just tell you, it's a 55 community, and I think that half of the community comes from up north, as I do.
They don't. Yeah.
As I do. Our elections are in December, when there are no snowbirds there. They do not send applications or any kind of correspondence saying that we're going to have an election. Would you like to run? The only one that we got a year ago said that it couldn't be copied, so that we couldn't share it because it couldn't be copied. It's really, it's so bad. It's laughable. It's so bad.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I'm sure it is, but at the end of the day, if no one challenges it, then nothing happens.
Right.
Okay? Because you can say, and I can hear in your voice, that what's going on, but I guess you've decided, well, you know what, things aren't really that bad. The guy's willing to do it. He's a nice guy.
That's not true. No, that's not true. I'm on the board. I'm one of those 16. I've been on. Wait, hold it. I've been on for 3 years. We're trying to make change. There's 3 or 4 of us that are like-minded, that we want to follow the documents. I have the absolute original documents. They are the only ones that exist. The attorney didn't even have all the documents. I've been trying to get them to look at these documents, and then this year they had a big problem, and finally they asked if I had the certain document, and I did, and it cost the association about $60,000. It had something to do with a foreclosure. I won't go into it. The thing is that this board has been on for 8, 10, 12 years. He's been president for 15 or more. And they're all, thinking that when they were 55 and they've been on for 8, 10, 12 years, they're 65, 75. Some are closer to 90, really. They don't want change. This board was able to acquire a lot of units because of this. You have to tell the office before you want to sell, and they have the right of first refusal. And so you got a half a dozen of these board members, and they're all women that have been able to purchase condos very cheaply. So, they're socked in.
Yeah.
So we don't really have voting, because the closest we got to it was last year. We've been trying to change it to February, when the Northerners are down, and we're having a lot of trouble. We've been trying to do that for a couple of years. So it's not that people don't care. It's just that they don't want to butt up against him. He can make your life miserable. When you
Well, that's
want
what
to
I meant.
sell, wait.
I mean,
When you want to sell, you have that Estapo. He can stop that because, your patio doesn't fit the guidelines. Well, hello, that's when they bought, not me, but that's when that guy bought it. He bought it with that patio, and now you're trying to stop him from selling it because you're mad at him because he wanted to make changes. He wanted to have a real election. I mean, I could fill a book.
What I'm saying is, and I understand exactly what you're saying, but what I'm saying is, yeah, the only reason he's still getting away with this stuff is because he's being allowed to get away with it, and whether that's because people aren't willing. And I understand where human nature is. You don't want to get into the confrontation. You don't want to get into the fight. You don't want to get into the mix. But he's gonna, I don't want to use the word bully because maybe he's not a bully per se.
Well, he's going to run us into the ground. He's doing a lot of things that are illegal.
That's where the membership or the other board members eventually need to rise up, okay, and do something. Because what it sounds like is, yeah, there's lots of problems there. Yeah, we can always point to this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. But that's just an academic exercise. I can say all day long that everything is wrong. Okay.
Yeah, no, I know, I understand.
But unless someone files a complaint with the state about the election process, or this thing about you can't sell your unit because your patio is the wrong size, well, maybe he can put that on the estoppel, but he can't quote stop the sale necessarily because, of course, I haven't seen your documents. But what I'm saying is, long story short, there are remedies. Easiest one, cheapest one, usually is political. More expensive one, more pain in the neck one is legal. But that takes effort, and it takes money sometimes, and it takes time, and I get it. And it takes look, if I'm 75, 80 years old, maybe I don't want to get into the fight in the mix. I'd rather just, it's not part of my life anymore.
Right.
So what I'm saying is, yeah, I mean, there are ways to resolve it. It's just a matter of whether anyone wants to jump through those hoops.
I got it. I've been trying to work on this where I just recently found out a couple of months ago that our blue book, the book that we're supposed to follow, was written by the treasurer of the association. It's not legal. It has nothing in there that's correct. He just wrote it and they bound it. And when I moved there, I had to give in my documents, hand them the documents. It's a ream of paper. It's from 1937 when the American Telephone and Telegraph put the lines in, and all the way through till 1993 when they never went and did anything after that legally. They would just do things and they wouldn't certify things or anything like that. But the point is that our blue book has nothing that it's just this guy's imagination of what he wanted it to look like. So we've been running on this book for 15 years. And now that they've acknowledged that the documents I have are correct and that the attorney didn't even have all of the documents, we had to send it to them. We're trying to write our blue book and bring it not even up to date. There's nothing in there that's up to date. But as far as the voting, and like the representative, we should be electing our representative to go to the property owners. And we don't. The president just picks the treasurer and they go together. I mean, we can go there. We can go and listen. We can't really say anything. But there's just nothing in. We got a lot of work to do. I just hope I can live it.
Oh,
Okay.
That's tough. I feel bad for you, Connie, because I know how hard that is, and that's what it's these kind of situations very, very difficult. You've got a huge board. It's hard to change a board like that. over time. You've got to, in your case, you got to change out and get 8 positions of support, and that's very tough, and it makes it difficult. But the problem is that over a period of time, like I said, and I think you said too, that the president's trying to do good. Probably, I mean, he's probably not trying to do bad things necessarily, but he's gotten into the power and the thought that he's the only one that can do it right. And if
Right.
anybody gets in there, it's going to get messed up. And I'll tell you, ultimately, he's going to pay for that, because when that much power is concentrated in one person or position within an association, ultimately there's a mistake made, and that mistake, instead of people assuming it's a mistake, they're going to assume it's intentional, that he knew exactly, because he's been telling everybody for years he knows exactly what he's doing. So
Right.
don't argue with me. I know what I'm doing. So now when he didn't, and he makes a big mistake, and it comes back, and he's got some involvement in that, where he makes money off of it, or something happens that he ends up better than somebody else, I guarantee you he's going to be facing charges at that point. And he's not going to have anybody to back him, because he kept everybody out. And and I understand a lot of times it's hard to get somebody to take charge of an association, and so you just kind of go along, and if there isn't any problems, you just kind of go along. But it really isn't good. I mean, it really is not good. It is not good for people to not serve a term on the board. I know people cringe at that thought, but you can't appreciate what kind of restrictions board members are under until you've
Right.
actually served on a board. It's easy to sit on the outside and say, oh, you should do this, you should do that. And then you get on the inside and you find, well, here, we can't really do that because of this, because of this, because of this. And so we either need to change this, or we have to do it this way. And that's hard. And I understand that. But, everybody that's going to choose to live in an association at least needs to take enough time to figure out what their association is about. It's not like, you're just going to be there a day or two. You're going to be there for 20 years or 30 years maybe. And it's a good idea to know what you're buying into and what the restrictions are and what needs to be changed over time. And so you guys are at least being proactive. I appreciate that. I think that's good. And educating, that's the key too, is to educate and to get people to understand. And that the blue book you're referring to, which is probably a term that's more consistent with your association, but it's really just rules, and those are set by the board, and those rules can't be they have to be consistent with your documents. The governing documents are going to take precedence over those rules if they're in conflict. And so,
Okay, well, there's nothing in the blue book that even resembles the documents. The treasurer decided to write this blue book. Actually, he told me that he was going to write it again when he retires. So, when he retires.
But see, he
But
can't.
there's nothing in there. There's absolutely nothing in there that's valid and goes with the original documents about voting, about representatives, about selling, about how long you can, when you buy a unit, it's 2 years before you can rent it, except if it's somebody that they know, then they'll change it and they'll make it for 6 months, for a couple of months, and then they'll change it back over to 2 years. It's sick. It wouldn't even make a good movie. It wouldn't. I'm sorry I took your time. I'll be calling in again.
Yeah, no problem. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for calling, Connie.
Thanks, Connie.
Yeah, that was yeah. So it's funny, Peter. It's you get into these things, but how many associations do we have like this? I mean, that are in virtually the same situation. It's a shame, and it is what happens. And I go back and forth on this. I appreciate that people should have the ability to to volunteer and save some money, and all that kind of thing. But it kind of irritates me that the state, has allowed us to have these organizations that are massive in terms of the amount of money that rolls through them, and yet you don't have to have any experience to be able to run them. And, you don't have to be licensed. You don't have to, the board can run them on their own without any kind of a licensing requirement. And it just amazes me. And I know people think they were saving money, but I just can't imagine running a company this large with people who really have.
Well, here's the problem. Yes and no. And you're the one that's usually much more libertarian than me.
Yeah.
Okay. Way more.
Right.
But the problem is that and I understand where you're coming from, but then if you make it too, for lack of a better word, difficult to serve, many communities just have a problem just finding people willing to serve and be on the board. So if you create lots of licensing requirements and this requirement and that requirement, and you're throwing in more roadblocks to what's already for a lot of communities a problem,
right,
in finding people to serve. So although I understand where you're coming from, from just dealing with associations for so long, I don't want to make it any more difficult for people to be on the boards. As it is, they don't want to even go through the board certification sometimes.
Right.
So, I don't know. I just, at least that's a step in the right direction. The board cert. At least then they have to, especially if they go to the class rather than just sign the certification. At least hopefully they are learning. At least at that point.
Well, and I guess, and I've kind of been this way all along, even when I wasn't doing property management work. I look at it, and I do think that we have all these requirements for associations over certain dollars amounts, right? But yet you could have a $5 million association that doesn't have to have anybody licensed to on property. You know what I mean? And
that's true.
There's a situation.
You can be self-managed.
That's what I mean.
That's what I mean. You can be self-managed.
And at some point, I think you get into some point. I think you need to get to the point where, if you're over a certain size, you have to have some sort of licensing. I mean, it's great to say you can self-manage, but that's like, we don't send people out and say, look, here's a tractor trailer. I know you got a driver's license. Go ahead and take that thing for a spin.
I understand.
And same thing with a motorcycle, whatever. And so, I don't know. You're right. I'm usually very much the opposite of that, but I get frustrated by, and I don't want somebody to come in and tell them what to do in terms of taking it over, but at least somebody who knows the law. It'd be nice, but they can't afford to hire an attorney, but but they need somebody who at least knows the law and can advise board members on what their rights are as a board. And, that's at least have some input there. I don't know. It's just, it does get, with no outside parties involved, it gets very, very dicey from time to time. And, but I'm serious about it. A lot of that is to protect the person that's thinking they're doing a good job. And I've just seen too many of those people, have their life shattered because, they thought they were doing good, and they end up, getting charges filed against them and thrown out of their community and ostracized and everything else. So it's a shame. But anyway, looks like we're running out of time. We had another good show, I think, in terms of being able to help the community and get some questions out there. Hopefully, others out there were listening and you'll join us because we will be back next Monday right here on WSTU Digital 1450. We are Martin County's Heritage Station.